shining light into the darkness. This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner. Abraham Hamilton III with Abraham Hamilton III here. I am delighted to have on the program with me a man who I was just telling him before we got on the air that I've been stalking him online. I so appreciate his work, his commitment to God first, to truth secondarily, and thirdly, with the courage of his convictions to actually do something about it. I'm speaking of none other than award-winning investigative journalist, author, speaker. Last time he was on our program, I believe we were talking about his book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. I am talking about none other than the CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media, Alex Newman. Alex, thank you for joining me here on the program.
It's an honor to be with you. Thank you for having me, Abe.
Oh, man, the pleasure is mine. And among your accolades and your bio, one of the things that stood out to me, which is heartening to me to see, because I knew that we were, fellow brethren, but this just really stamped it for me, that you serve as the director of G. Edward Griffin's Red Pill University. And for those who do not know, G. Edward Griffin is the author of the masterful work, The Creature from Jekyll Island, that details the formation of the Federal Reserve System. And it is his research has been the primary source that I have utilized in describing the Federal Reserve System here in America. So to see that is something that you are not only aware of, but are actively engaged in working with G. Edward Griffin's organization is just something that just further bolsters my excitement about having you here on the program.
Well, thank you, Abraham. Yeah, G. Edward Griffin is just a legend. I mean, the guy has been exposing these evildoers for literally, 50 years before I arrived on this planet. He's in his mid-90s now.
Yeah.
And and at this point, it's obvious now that G. Edward Griffin was correct on so much of this. And the exposure of the Federal Reserve, I think now we're actually watching this play out in real time in Washington, D.C. Where's the gold in Fort Knox, right? We were just asking about that yesterday. So I think a lot of these questions need to be revisited, and G. Edward Griffin's book on this is a really good starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I've been attempting to emphasize for our audience here is that when the founders wrote our Constitution, they did so with the expressed intention that families would be able to discuss it around their dinner tables. It wasn't something that was reserved for kind of an upper echelon aristocracy, or that the notion of constitutional law was a province solely for lawyers, even worse, lawyers in black dresses who sit behind judicial benches, but that constitutional law was something that the entire American populace was invested in understanding. And we've lost so much of that over time. And I think the Federal Reserve System is a great example. Like, most people don't understand that the Constitution expressly requires that Congress coins money. So then how then do we have this Federal Reserve System with Federal Reserve notes? And now really it's just ones and zeros in computers. But how does that impact us? Well, one of the major things, and I'm not going to turn this into an entire Federal Reserve conversation, but prior to the establishment of the Federal Reserve System in 1913, over 90% of the American populace was completely debt-free. That when they wanted to form businesses and things of that nature, they would work with family members and use their private capital to do these things. Now it is completely reversed to where over 90% of the American populace is laden with debt. And the scripture tells us plainly that the borrower is a slave to the lender. Unfortunately, that this was a part of the plan from the very beginning. And G. Edward Griffin details that pretty succinct, not succinctly, but extensively in his seminal work, The Creature from Jekyll Island. And so a lot of the ways we've gotten to where we are today has been little by little negligence, a little ignorance, a little negligence, a little ignorance. And we arrive at a place where now we have 32 trillion plus in debt, not including unfunded liabilities.
Absolutely, Abe. And the Bible specifically prohibits usury.
Yep.
The Bible specifically calls dishonest weights and measures an abomination. And yet here we have an entire money system based on usury, based on fraud, based on dishonest weights and measures, based on sucking the wealth out of the productive category of Americans, the middle class, and transferring it all to the mega banks that own this system. That actually was a big part of my awakening, Abe. When I was in college, I started learning about this, and I taught economics for 12 years now, so I've really become fascinated by this. But when I first read this, it was actually in a left-wing book. I called up the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and I just said, look, who owns you? And I expected, like, don't be such a moron. It's a government agency. What are you talking about? And they put me through to the public information officer, and the public information officer says, oh, well, we're owned by our member banks, and they have shares, and we pay them dividends, and they elect our board. And I'm thinking, what in the world? So that really helped set me on the trajectory that that brought me here, where I've started questioning everything and investigating all this. It is, I believe, one of the most important frauds in all of human history, because by taking control of the money, that allowed them to take control of everything, the education, the churches, the companies. And we have got to talk about this as a nation, instead of just trusting that the people in Washington, D.C. and in Wall Street have our best interests at heart. They don't.
Yeah, I mean, let's continue on this line of conversation. We'll get some of the other stuff later, because I think this is very important. First of all, folks, one of the things I like to do is point you to good resources. Alex Newman's Liberty Sentinel is one of those resources. LibertySentinel.org is one of his major websites. I definitely want to invite you, Alex, to share more, because one of my objectives for this program is to connect people to trustworthy resources where they can get this information and to see this happening. To learn, similar to you, I was overwhelmed with any number of feelings when I learned, wait a minute, you mean to tell me that the Federal Reserve System is not federal? And
Right.
there are no reserves.
Mm-hmm.
And even now in our national conversations about inflation, what is the major thing that the populace waits for? Well, how are interest rates going to be changed by the Fed? Well, who gave the Fed the authority? Who gave a private entity the authority to govern American finance, and by virtue of governing American finance, really shaping the world on a financial front, overwhelmed with any number of emotions? And now we're at this place, and I know you've talked about this before, to where the United Nations is working with Bill Gates to create this digital public infrastructure. What is going on here, Alex?
Well, I think what's going on, Abe, is that wicked men have conspired, and I use that term in the dictionary sense, right?
Yes.
Two or more people working together in secret for evil or immoral intent.
Yes.
David Rockefeller brags in his autobiography, page 405, that he's conspiring with what he calls a secret cabal of internationalists to build a one world political and economic order. That's right in his autobiography.
Yes.
Page 405. These wicked men, I believe, under the direction of the powers and principalities that the Apostle Paul describes in Ephesians chapter 6, have worked for generations now. I mean, I think probably you could take this all the way back to the Tower of Babel, if not earlier. They have worked to take control of the planet through the money, through business, through education. And when you look at this money system and how it grew up into this abomination, it's lies piled on top of lies, piled on top of lies. Yeah. They told us when they wanted to pass the Federal Reserve Act that this was the way to rein in the bankers. And yet it was the bankers who came up with the idea. As you know, Abe, they met on Jekyll Island, which is just a few hours north of where I live. The government's got the signs right there. The big bankers got together with Senator Aldrich here, and they came up with the Federal Reserve Act. And then they told Americans this was to rein in the bankers. So they have completely undermined all of our institutions, to where the healthcare system now works to destroy our health. The education system works to destroy education. The justice system, at least until very recently, has been working to destroy justice. And if we don't deal with this, America's going to end up going the same way as so many nations before us, whether it's China or Russia or Cuba or Mozambique or Angola or Laos, or you pick your country. That's where we're going to end up if the American people don't get serious about putting a stop to this, restoring truth and justice and righteousness. And it's a very, very concerning prospect.
Man, I mean, it's so true. I want to dig down a little bit into some of these details of the central bank. I'm sorry, this digital public infrastructure, because what you said is so true. And I'm kind of setting up a question now that I'm going to ask after we talk about some of the details of this digital public infrastructure. But the problem at this point seems so big, so outsized, that it could cause a lot of people at home to feel like, wait a minute, what can I actually do to fight against that? Before I get to that question, what are some of the details that these wicked men, including Bill Gates, frankly, who's known to be invested in reducing population sizes and other things of that nature, what are some of the details of this digital public infrastructure that, frankly, the Wuhan flu is used to kind of expedite the formation of?
Yeah, thanks, Abe. And I hope people will understand this. They are building what I call a digital global gulag, a digital panopticon, where everything you do will not just be surveilled. That's a big part of it, but also manipulated. We're talking about a control grid here that is beyond, I think, anything that a normal person could even begin to imagine. So when Bill Gates talks about a digital public infrastructure, there's several key components. It starts with digital money. They want to move us to what they call a central bank digital currency. Now, for the time being, Donald Trump has pushed pause on that. He's signed an executive order forbidding any executive agencies to get involved in this, and that's good. But that's just a reversal of the previous executive order from Joe Biden, who right when he got into office said it was one of the highest priorities of the administration to develop and eventually deploy a United States central bank digital currency. So digital money, under the leadership of the Bank for International Settlements, which is kind of standardizing this process around the world. Communist China, of course, was the pilot nation, would be used, as the head of the Bank for International Settlements says, to completely eliminate all privacy. Right now, you could take a $100 bill, you could walk into a store, you could buy whatever you want. Nobody's going to know but you and the shopkeeper. Once we move to 100% digital money, every transaction you make will be monitored, will be put into a database, will be analyzed by artificial intelligence and algorithms. So that's one big component of it. And the next big component of it is the digital ID. They want every single person, not just in the United States, but in the entire world, to have a digital biometric ID, which they will use to spend their digital currency to interact with any system, whether it be government, whether it be corporate, whether it be religious. All of it would involve your digital ID and your digital currency. The last big part of this is the international blockchain ledger, which sounds like a mouthful. I think they deliberately try to make this stuff seem confusing. So I'll try to explain it in as simple terms as possible. The Bank for International Settlements, as we speak, right this moment, is developing this international system where every asset in the known universe will be tokenized. Every farm, every car, every stock, every bond, every tree, every carbon credit, everything would become a digital token that lives forever on this international blockchain system, kind of like the blockchain that Bitcoin uses. So once it's registered on there, there's tons of different systems that are all verifying that that's what it says it is, that that's who owns it, etc. And then if you want to buy or sell, you're going to have to interact with this international blockchain ledger with your digital ID and your digital currency. It is a system of total control. And then you add to that all the data that they're gathering, like from your smart cities, from your smart appliances in your home, from your smart meter that regulates the electricity coming into your house, from your internet search history, which, by the way, Google is monitoring it all. And they want to build what they themselves refer to as a social credit score, system. And this was pioneered in 2015. That's when I first wrote about it for the New American Magazine. In China, every citizen, or really not citizens in the traditional sense, they're serfs, they're subjects, victims, right? Exactly. They each have a score, and your score is based on whether you behave yourself and support the regime or not. If you have a bad score, you lose your privileges. If you have a good score, you get privileges. And so the control mechanism works without even having to torture you or imprison you. It's worse than people could even begin to understand, Abe, and we've got to be sounding the alarm about this.
It's so true. I'll never forget. Right here on this program, and I know it's God's providence leading me to prepare for the show, but I was sounding the alarm on the Wuhan flu. I had Dr. Christina Parks on, who is a scientist in this field, and I came across the UN mandates where they admitted that they understood that what they called social distancing, I called it physical distancing, and masking, and all of those things would do nothing to impact transmission of Shmovid or contraction of it, but they did it as an experiment in control to see how many people, how soon, and how broadly they could get compliance. They admitted that in writing. And so a lot of these things have been happening. I mean, Kaiser Trudeau from Canada literally said that Shmovid gave them the opportunity to advance their pre-pandemic objectives. And these things are happening at a mind-boggling pace. And as I alluded to earlier, it could seem and feel so big that the individual American citizen can feel like, wait a minute, there's nothing I can do to stop this albatross. So what are some of the things that you would recommend that American citizens can, should, and must do in order to push back against, frankly, this wickedness overrunning our country?
I think it really begins with the individual, Abe. It begins with us recognizing that this is happening. It begins with us reading the scriptures. It begins with us understanding what God teaches on every subject, right? The purpose of government is not to educate your kids or provide you health care or give you a digital ID. The purpose of government is to punish evil. And so we need to understand these things. We need to get back to a biblical worldview. And then from our own individual actions, we then need to extend that outward to our homes, our families, our wives, our husbands, our children. Are we educating them in the fear, the discipline, the nurture, the admonition of the Lord, as we're commanded to do in Ephesians? Are we teaching our children about God and his laws and his ways and what he's done for us when we wake up in the morning, when we're walking by the way, when we're going to bed at night, when we're sitting down to eat? If we're not doing those things, we're not fulfilling our obligations. We're not even fulfilling the Great Commission. God told us to make disciples of all nations, and yet we act like our children are not part of that. So I really do think it begins with us, in our homes, in our families, and then from there we do need to, I believe, get active. We have a very unique situation in this country where we, the people, if you read the Constitution, are the sovereigns. So God has told us to be good stewards. God has commanded us to be good stewards of the blessings he's given us, and how could we not admit that being born in a free country based on biblical principles is a blessing that we need to protect? So we need to get active, and that may be calling up your congressman and asking for a meeting. That may be running for state representative. That may be calling your sheriff and discussing some issues with him and educating people in your community. It may be getting more active in your church and using your church as a springboard to go out and preach the gospel, to go out and try to bring the good news to the rest of your community. So I think there's a lot we have to do, Abe, and I think if people were just following God's instructions, all the people who say they're Christian, if we would just follow God's instructions, a lot of this evil would melt away so fast.
More when we get back from this break with Alex Newman.
Thoughts of the child you were carrying keep pouring over in your mind. A deep, unrelenting sadness overshadows your days, and you wonder if you will ever feel whole again. There is hope and healing from a reproductive loss. Call the International Helpline, 866-482-LIFE, and talk with someone who has been where you are. Your call is confidential, and we will help you find healing. 866-482-LIFE.
The Middle East, that's one part of the world we need to pay attention to, especially the country of Israel. Each week, I'll help you make sense of what's happening in that region through a biblical lens. I'll bring you important information about security threats, archaeological discoveries, biblical prophecy, ministries happening on the ground, and much more. I'm John Riley. Join me for the Middle East Report Special Edition every Saturday at 6:30 p.m. Central on American Family Radio as I connect you to the people, places, and geography of what we read in God's Word.
Navigate the hate. This is David Wheaton, host of The Christian Worldview. Jesus used strong language to describe the reaction the unbelieving world would have to his followers. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this, the world hates you. Why the hate? Jesus said, "For everyone who does evil hates the light, and does not come to the light, lest his deeds be exposed." Sinners want their sin, but Christians are called to warn and urge unbelievers to forsake it and trust in Christ. Hear our most recent program with Natasha Crane, author of When Culture Hates You, at thechristianworldview.org, and then join us this weekend for another topic that will sharpen your worldview.
Listen to The Christian Worldview with David Wheaton, Saturday mornings at 8 Central on American Family Radio.
Do you believe in the absolute inerrancy of God's holy word? Do you believe in the power of the Holy Spirit to radically change lives and empower us to live like Christ? At Wesley Biblical Seminary, we believe God is raising up a movement of people across our nation and across the world who hold fast to the authority of the Bible and the hope of holiness. We are working today to equip tomorrow's pastors and Christian leaders through biblical and theological education and practical ministry that's accredited, affordable, online, and highly personal. Our programs include undergraduate, master's, and doctoral degrees, certificate programs, and even training for lay people. So whatever your next step is in being equipped for ministry, we're here for you. And if you believe these are the kinds of pastors we need leading our churches in the future, we invite you to learn more about partnering with us through giving. Learn more about Wesley Biblical Seminary by visiting us at wbs.edu today.
What we believe about the Bible is based on what we believe about its source.
The God Who Speaks, the award-winning documentary from the American Family Association, is now available in a special limited edition DVD set. This release includes a Sunday school curriculum and 2 hours of additional footage. Go to thegodwhospeaks.org to get your copy today. thegodwhospeaks.org.
The Hamilton Corner podcast and 1-minute commentaries are available at afr.net. Back to the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner. My guest is Alex Newman, CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media. You can find his website at libertysentinel.org. One of the things that you'll find there that was just such a blessing to my heart that he defines sentinel using Webster's 1828 dictionary. If you've been listening to this show for any length of time, you know that is the Hamilton Corner's dictionary of choice. And I won't go into a whole long diatribe now as to why that is the case, but I was blessed to see that. Alex, is there any other websites that we should direct the people to, our people here, to connect with you and Liberty Sentinel Media and all the different things that you're involved in?
Well, thank you, Abe. LibertySentinel.org is a good landing spot. We do all of our shows are posted there every day. I also serve as senior editor at the New American Magazine. I'm executive director of Public School Exit, which is just a volunteer role, and then I write and contribute to a lot of different publications. But LibertySentinel.org is a good landing spot, and then on X, Alex Newman _JOU.
Excellent, excellent. And before we went to the break, you were talking about the things, and it just the note of my heart that we share routinely on this program, the necessity of understanding what we the people can, should, and must do. And I was just talking with you during the break about that was a real discussion during our founding era. A lot of people forget that between the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the U.S. Constitution's drafting first in 1787 and ultimate ratification 2 years thereafter, there was something that governed the United States of America, and it was called the Articles of Confederation. All right. And the preamble to our Constitution that begins with "we the people," that caused great consternation amongst anti-federalists in particular, namely Patrick Henry, that during the Virginia ratifying convention that he argued that the reference to "we the people" in the preamble, which diverged from preambles in popular governing documents at the time, even American governing documents, the treaties with Paris and things of that nature, did not begin with an expression of "we the people." And so Patrick Henry warned and was concerned that this was an expression that state sovereignty would be eroded and that this would set the foundation for this outsized national government that will gobble up the states. And his fellow anti-federalist, Edmund Randolph, governor of Virginia at the time, said, no, Patrick, this is not an expression of the decimation of state sovereignty. It's an articulation of where true American authority rests. The reference to "we the people" is the right identification that the source of authority for ratifying this Constitution rests with the people as opposed to the state as a corporate entity, and that the state is comprised of people. So in order to have the proper ratification to occur, the states needed to recognize the individual liberty, the individual authority, and that was a major transition point for the United States of America, that the individuals are the ones who ultimately have the authority. The reality of unalienable rights is what individuals have, because it's the individuals that are made in the image and likeness of God. So I appreciate your highlighting that we have to recognize that we, the people, still have the authority. But what has happened, and I often say this, that darkness is not an affirmative force. It merely reoccupies the space vacated by the light. And for too long, generationally even, that we, the people in the United States of America, have ceded our authority. And so that darkness has infiltrated the space where the individuals in our nation have vacated. But high time is present for us now to re-establish ourselves as we should be established. Now, you mentioned that one of the major sources of drift in our nation has been in the education space. You wrote the book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. I endorsed your book. You rightly talk about the history of government education in our nation. And there is an issue that is happening right now that needs to be addressed. Here I describe myself as an equal opportunity truth teller, call balls and strikes. I'm grateful for President Trump's election, for a lot of the things that he's doing, but I don't think we help him by being silent when he makes missteps. And I think one of the missteps is the potential nomination as the, Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Education, Penny Schwinn. And this is something that I know you've covered at Liberty Sentinel. What does our audience here need to know about Penny Schwinn?
Well, thank you, Abe. I think this is a really important matter, and I agree with you 100%. I'm very pleased with much of what Donald Trump has done, but it doesn't help him or anybody for us to just act like cheerleaders on a football team. We need to look at each action, each nominee based on their merits. And Penny Schwinn, unfortunately, I first came across her several years ago when she was Commissioner of Education in Tennessee. And I wrote an article about her because she had made a proposal that the state of Tennessee go visit every single child in the state at home to interview them or interrogate them about everything from their mental health to their vaccine status to their stress levels to their family life. I was very, very concerned to see that. And you look at the press release that they put out. She referred to the children as our children. She said all the stakeholders need to rally around here. And that is very, very troubling thinking. These are not our children. God entrusted those children to us. The image of God is on those children, not the image of Caesar. And so that was really concerning. And then as I dug deeper into her background, I see she's been involved in trying to stop the removal of all kinds of left-wing ideology and indoctrination in the schools in Tennessee, controversies in Texas, controversies in California. And the one thing that everybody points to, all the conservatives who are supporting her, they say, well, at least she supports school choice. So I looked into her support for school choice, and what I found was a public comment she had made where she said, we can't just give out money. We have to have accountability. We have to have transparency. We have to have high standards, which is exactly what I've been warning about for years. If they start giving us money, they're going to want to start controlling our home schools and our private Christian schools, and that's totally unacceptable. So I hope Trump will withdraw this nomination, or the Senate will scrutinize it closely. And even if they shut down the Department of Education, we need good people in there while that process happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And similar to you, I've warned that whatever the government funds, it controls ultimately. You know, when have you ever seen a scenario where government gained access to an area and decided, you know what, we've done enough there. Why don't we back away?
Never happens.
When's the last time you seen that happen, Alex? February 14th?
Right, that's right. This is the nature of government, right? As Ronald Reagan said, the closest thing to eternal life is a government program.
It literally is the nature of government. I'll never forget it. And I know you and I are getting to know each other even more so. And I'm looking forward to us being together in Bartlett, Tennessee this summer at the Culture Proof 2025 conference. But I was in law school when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. That's where I'm from. And I ended up having to relocate to Texas. I ultimately ended up passing the bar and starting my professional career in Texas. But following Hurricane Katrina, we were directed to this disaster assistance center, okay? And through FEMA, actually, to help with rents, you know, and I did this very, very radical thing. You might have heard about it before. Though I was still in law school, I had to work my way through law school, so I got a job. And, you know, because we were being called Katrina refugees and all of these things. And when I got my job, I went to the Disaster Assistance Center to say, hey, I don't need any assistance because I have a job. And the Disaster Assistance Center made it almost impossible for me to reject assistance. I was required to have meetings twice a month, bring my check stubs, and to prove I didn't need the assistance. And get this, they still sent the check to my apartment. So each month I had to work more to bring the uncashed check back to the Disaster Assistance Center, and they made me do that for 6 months before they stopped sending the checks to my house.
It's typical of government, right? We love you so much, we're going to help you at gunpoint if necessary.
Yes, and I was, and the thing I told them, I said, listen, I know there are lots of people from New Orleans who need help. Thankfully, I've been fortunate enough where I don't need it. And so the old adage, getting the assistance. I didn't even do anything to get on the list of assistance other than being there where you got like toiletries and things of that nature. But getting off of the assistance, it took a Herculean effort on my part, and I'm pretty sure I may be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure I was in a minority of people who was saying that thank you, but I'm in a position, by God's grace, to not need that assistance right now, and I had to work harder to get off of it than to get on it. It was remarkable.
Yeah, and praise the Lord for people who, even in the face of that kind of pressure, still withstand. You know, I'm here in Florida right now. I could easily take $50,000 per year to homeschool my 6 children. But I won't, because it's other people's money. I have no right to take my neighbor's money to educate my children. I don't need $50,000 a year to educate my children. We might spend a couple of thousand, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 to educate them. We're part of a few co-ops, classical conversations, some other things. But even a lot of our good friends who know the Lord and love the Lord, it's very difficult to resist that temptation. So I've been pleased to see a little bit of a shift in kind of the public attitude. When I heard Donald Trump talking about the possibility of abolishing FEMA, maybe sending that back to the states, that is, I think, a step in the right direction. Ultimately, this should be a responsibility for the churches, for neighbors, for nonprofit organizations. But we really need to move away from the direction of the government is our caretaker, the government is responsible for us, and even worse, for our children, the same attitude that Penny Schwinn displayed while she was in Tennessee.
Yeah, you're spot on, man. And this goes back to something you said earlier. Where will we cultivate this idea that we are not entitled to other people's money? We're not entitled to our neighbors' resources. That's not going to come from government. It's not going to come from government education. That's going to only come from the homes and the discipleship that we cultivate within our homes, within our families. And this is, again, something that we can and we should and we must do it. We must do it. You referred to President Trump's expression, and seemingly in the short order, we'll see an executive order to this end that he wants to dismantle. This is what he said from the Oval Office last week, I think. I would like to see it dismantled immediately concerning the Department of Education. Now, when you recognize the breadth and scope of the Department of Education, it'll be a daunting task, and ultimately it's going to require an act of Congress in order to do so. But do you think that is a realistic proposition that the president can and will follow through on his expressed desire to dismantle the Department of Education?
Well, as you said, Abe, this is not something that he can do on his own. And there are good ways to do this and there are bad ways to do it. I'll start by saying, of course, the Department of Education needs to be shut down. Article 1, Section 8 does not list education as one of the powers we delegated to the federal government. They don't need that department. It should be shut down. But there's been great bills introduced in Congress. In fact, Thomas Massie has been introducing a bill, Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, for at least 4 Congresses now, H.R. 899, to terminate the Department of Education. I interviewed him about it. It's a simple bill. Why do we need this? But then you look at what the swamp is doing right now, and you've got these fake shut down the Department of Education bills. There's one in the Senate right now that just redistributes all the functions to other agencies. The Treasury will handle this, Interior will handle this, Health and Human Services will handle this. I don't think that's really an improvement to just scatter all these functions and powers and authorities to a bunch of different agencies. We do need to shut it down as a baby step in the right direction. And I think Trump has kind of expressed a desire to use some of these authorities that have been usurped by the feds over the years to reverse some of the craziness. And I understand that desire. I understand that temptation. The kids in California are being taught things that are horrific. But we need to understand these powers never should have been usurped in the first place. I hope he'll get support in Congress. We know there's a lot of rhinos there. I hope he'll get the support to shut it down. It needs to happen. But that's not going to improve the schools to where a Christian can say, oh, well, I'll just send little Johnny to the local public school today. We've got a long way to go after that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. What is your take on, I know a lot of people were objecting to Linda McMahon being tapped by President Trump to be his Secretary of Education. What do you think about her nomination?
Well, if her job is going to be to shut the place down and, turn the lights off, fumigate, and sell the building, she's probably an adequate pick for that.
To body slam it?
Right, exactly. And that's what needs to happen. I mean, this thing needs to be pulverized. It needs to be crushed into the ground. Everybody needs to be fired. All these programs need to be shut down. So if that's really the plan, that's going to be great. And I've talked to quite a few of the people who are working on this. Trump does, I think, genuinely want to shut down this department. So I hope that's what will happen. I differ with him on a few areas, like this idea of federal school choice. I think there's right ways to help get kids out of the public school system, and then more dangerous ways. We talked about this just a moment ago a little bit. So I hope that we can all agree the U.S. Department of Education shouldn't exist. The federal government shouldn't have any involvement in the school system. And if that's the understanding in D.C., I think Linda will do a great job. And I hope that's the direction we'll move in.
I agree. I mean, similar to you, my wife and I, we have 6 children. We educate our children at home as a feature of our discipleship commitment. The only thing that I would remotely be willing to entertain, and I remotely is the key word there, would be an exclusion of the funds expended from taxable income. No voucher, we don't need any money. Like you said, I don't need the federal government to fund my commitment to rear my children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And if that is not potentially on the table, then stay out of our way. Leave us alone. Let us continue with the unalienable rights that God has given us to rear our children as he's called us to do so, and government stay out of our business. And that seems like a radical concept now, but for the majority of our national history, that is what the American people understood. With this recent development or introduction of the Jimmy Carter of the Department of Education, lots of people have used recency and experience and synonymized that with being normal. That's not normal. And unfortunately, the disrespectful music is on, and we're running out of time. Alex, we got to have you back on, man. Thank you for joining us today on the program.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Evan. God bless you, sir.